Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Praptasya Kalyana Gunanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charana Vrindam Praptasya Kalyana Gunanavasya Vande Guru Shri Vande Guru Shri Charana Vrindam Vande Guru Shri Charana Vrindam Charana Vrindam Mahaprabhu ki Tana Nitya Gita Paditramadhyam Manasurasena Mahaprabhu ki Tana Nitya Gita Paditramadhyam Romanchakam Pasru Taranga Bhajo Vande Guru Shri Charana Vrindam Shri Vigrahara Dana Nityanana Shingaratanama Diramarjanado Juktasya bhaktamsya niyunjatopi Vande Guru Shri Charana Vrindam Chaturvidhashi Bhagavat Prasada Satana Triptan Hari Bhakta Shanga Chaturvidhashi Bhagavat Prasada Satana Triptan Kridvaiva Tripte Bhajata Shadeva Vande Guru Shri Charana Vrindam Shiradikama Dhabayarapara Madhurya Leela Gunarupa Namna Madhurya Leela Gunarupa Namna Pratikshana Swa Dhanalalupasya Vande Guru Shri Charana Vrindam Ne kunjayono Kratikelisidya Jaya Livere Jokti Apekshaniya Nikundayo no Kratikelisidya Jaya Livere Tatratidacha Atibalavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Sakchadharitena Shamasta Shastre Uktastathava Vyataiva Sadhavi Kintu Prabharja Priya Evatasya Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Kintu Prabharja Priya Evatasya Vande Guru Shri Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasado Yasya Prasadam Nagati Kutapi Yasya Prasada Yasya Prasada Nagati Kutapi Dayam Stubam Tasya Yasatrin Sanyam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Jayam Stubam Tasya Yasatrin Sanyam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitina Mine Nama Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitina Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunavadi Pachatarisha Tarine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunavadi Pachatarisha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda No, Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Chaitanya Nityananda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Haribo, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hariyaraye Nama Krishna, Jadavaye Nama, Jadavaye Madhavaya Keshavaye Namaha. Gopal Govindaram Shimadhusudan Giridhari Gopina Madana Mohan Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Sita Hari Guru Vaishnava Bhagavata Gita Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raguna Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasaraguna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Hare Rama Shri Shri Radha Nilamadhava Radha Nilamadhava Radhe Jaya Jagannath Jayo Baladeva Jayo Subhadrama Jayo Sudarshan Chakra Jaya Sitaram Jaya Sitaram Sitaram Jayo Lakshman Hanuman Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Pramanande Haribo Jai Om Vishnupada Paramita Prabhagavacharya Ashtottara Sarasi Shimad Iskon Pratishta Vividi Samstapakachara Vaishnav Saromani Gaura Piyajana Krishna Prema Bhakta Patita Pavana Abhacharavina Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Gauriya Guru Varga Patita Udhara Ki Jai Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Gunasa Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ji Ki Jai Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Prem se kaho se Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai Jai Param Dayal Se Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai Jai Premanama Sankirtane Kajanaka Prema Purushottama Shri Sachinandana Shriman Gauranga Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Gaur Hari Mavarana Avatar Ki Jai Kolokera Pramadhana Harinam Sankirtan Jaga Ki Jai Yoga Dharma Hare Krishna Mahamantra Ki Jai Brihat Midanga Transcendental Book Distribution Seva Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopagopna Radha Kun Syama Kunya Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Brajabim Vrindavan Mathurudam Ki Jai Fellowship Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Shri Shri Maya Purnavadip Eka Chakradam Ki Jai Parama Karuna Shri Shri Gaur Nitai Ki Jai Shri Purushottama Kitra Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Shri Shri Jagannath Swami Baladev Prabhu Smaspat Devi Darshan Chakra Bhagavan Ki Jai Bhakti Sarva Vigna Vinashana Karan Shingare Bhagavan Ki Jai Ganga Mai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulasi Maharani Vrindi Devi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Jai Shmati Radharani Ki Jai Shamaveta Bhakta Vrindi Ki Jai Nitai Gaurari Pramanandi All glory to the assembled bodies All glory to the assembled bodies All glory to the assembled bodies All glories, all glories, all glories to Shri Shri Guru Shri Gaur Hari Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Pralada Pralada Hiranyakashipu Raksha Silatangkanaka Ito nishinga Parato nishinga Jato jato jamita to nishinga Bayir nishinga Rudaye nishinga Narasimha Magiri Sharana Prabhade Prabhakara Kamalavare Naka Paramutta Singha Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanavinga Kesavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadishare Jai Jagadishare Jai Jagadishare Kesavadruta Narari Rupa Jai Jagadishare Jai Jagadishare Jai Jagadishare Kesavadruta Jai Jagadishare Jai Jagadishare Jaya Nishingade Jaya Nishingade Nishingade Jaya Nishingade Narahari Narahari Jaya Narahari Lakshmi Narasimha Jaya, Lakshmi Narasimha Jaya, Lakshmi Narasimha Jaya, Lakshmi Narasimha. Jaya Bhakta Prahlad, Prahlad Maharaj, Bhakta Prahlad, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. जय श्री भक्ति परसर विघ्नाश कृष्ण भगवान की जय। भक्त श्रेष्ठ प्रहलाद महाराज की जय। हरिनाम संकीर्तन यज्ञ की जय। निताय गौर हरि प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि। Shri Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satavatai Namo Namaha. Jai Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki.
Namo Namaha Tulasi Krishna Priyasi Namo Namaha
Tulasi Krishna Priyasi Namo Namaha.
Radha Krishna Seva Abhilashi
Radha Krishna Seva Pava Abhilashi.
Radha Krishna Seva Pavo
Radha Krishna Seva Prabhu Abhilashi.
Je tumhara sharana loy tara vancha purna hoy.
Je tumhara sharana loy tara vancha purna. कृपा करे करो तारे वृंदावन वासी
मोरा अभिलाष दिलास कुंजे दियोवास
मोरा विलास कुंज दियावा
नयने हेरी बोसारा जुगल रूपरासी
अमिनायने रिबो सदा जुगल रूपरासी निवेदनधार साकिरयनु गताकार
सेवा अधिकार दिए करो निज दासी
सेवा अधिकार दिए करो निज दासी
दीन कृष्ण दासी को ये जिना मोरा हो
दीन कृष्ण दास को है ये नाम
श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदा न भासी
श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदा नवासी
श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदा न भासी
श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदा नवासी
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यानि कानि च तानि तानि प्रणक्ष्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणं परे परे
यानि कानि शापानि ब्रह्महत्यानि कानि तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा परे परे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यानि कानि च तानि तानि प्रणक्ष्यन्ते प्रदक्षिणं परे परे
जाने कानि पापानि ब्रह्महत्यानि कानि तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ते प्रदक्षिणा परे परे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यानि कानि च तानि तानि प्रणक्ष्यन्ते प्रदक्षिणं परे परे
जाने कानि पापानि ब्रह्महत्यानि कानि तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ते प्रदक्षिणा परे परे
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya, Vrinda Devi Jaya, Tulsi Maharani Jaya, Vrinda Devi.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya, Tulsi Maharani, Tulsi Maharani Jaya, Tulsi Maharani.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya, Vrinda Devi Jaya, Tulsi Maharani Jaya, Vrinda Devi.
Tulsi Maharani Jaya, Devi.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Nittai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nittai Gaura Hari Bol.
Shrimati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai.
Jai Shri Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Shatavatai Namo Namah. Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Shatavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Shatavatai Namo Namaha. Jai Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Oh Tulsi, we love Krishna. I bow before you again and again. My desire to obtain the service to Shri Radha and Krishna. They also gave me residence in Pleasure Grove, Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus within my vision of always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna.
I beg you to make me,
Full of the goddamns and so rise.
please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own maidservant. This volume
Is very fallen and lowly seven Krishna praise. May I always stream in love with Shri Radha and Govind. Shrimati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shikyastakam Ki Jai. Chaito Darpanamanjanam Bhavam Mahadavagni Nivapanam Shreyakari Vachandrika Vitaranam Vidya Badhu Jivanam Anandam Udivardhanam Pradipadam Purnamrita Shradanam Sarvatmasnam Parampara Vijayati Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Vaudha Nija Sarva Shakti Tatrapita Niyamita Shmarane Nakala Ita
Durga.
Tarorapi Saishnuna Amani Namanadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Na Dhanam Na Janam Na Sundarim Kavitam Vajagarishakamaye mama janmane janmaneshwari bhavatar bhaktiraitu kittvai ainanda tanuja kinkaram paritamam vishame bhavam kripaya tava pada pankaja stita dhuri sadrisham vichintaya nayanam galora shrudharaya vadanam gadgadharudaya gira pulakari chitam vapukada
tava namagrahane bhavishyati yugayitam nimesena chakshusha pravasaitam shanyayitam jagat sarvam govinda vinayame aslishya vapadaratam pinastumam adasanam mamhato karutuva yata tata vavidadatu lampato mat prananatas tusa eva na huraha Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama
Rama Rama Hare Hare Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sikyastakam ki jai
Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Puchani Visesha Sunyamani Paskati.
Glory to the
Shri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life of repeated birth and death. The Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to the living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names, but I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than a straw on the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor, yet somehow or other I have fallen into this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up, and when will the hairs of my body stand on end at the recitation of your holy name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I am feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and he shall remain so even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Siksastakam Ki Jai. Namo Om Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Papa Nityananda Shri Vaitikadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. To bless from the devotees who dedicate their lives to propagating holy names to the Lord. Lord Brahma, to be equal to independent names of Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the orders of the spiritual master. To blaspheme the Vedic literature or literature in pursuance to the Vedic version. To consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna as imagination. To give some interpretation on the holy name of the Lord. To commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. Consider the chanting of Hare Krishna one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in the Vedas as fruit of activities or karma kanda. To instruct the faithless person about the glories of the holy name. To not have complete faith in chanting the holy name, and to maintain material attachments, even after understanding so many instructions in this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be a Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success. Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, They're just like desire trees that can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they're full of compassion for the fallen, conditioned souls. Vanchakalpa tarabhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Vaishnava Thakur ki jai. Namo Shri Guru Pranama prayers ki jai. Om Aganya Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chaksurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swabhadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jataha Pachakamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsa Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Suhaguna Ragunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Saidvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Nivitamsa Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutali Shri Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamini Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Tinamine Srivasavanavi Devi Dayitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayane Prabhave Namaha Madhur Ujvala Primadhya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostate Nama Oste Nurvani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudapa Apasiddhanta Dvantaharine Namo Gora Kishoraya Sakshad Vairagya Murtaye Ripralambara Sambhade Padambajayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachitananda Namine Gora Shakti Swarupaya Waravir Baba Bhumestvam Nirdesta Sajjana Priya Vaishnava Sarva Bhumashri Jagannataya Te Namaha Vanshakalpa Tarabhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namne Guru Chuse Namaha Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Saktikam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostate Jayatam Suratur Pangur Mama Manda Mater Kati Matsarva Swapadam Bojo Radha Madanamohano Divyat Vrindaranya Kalpadumadaha Shrimad Ratnagara Simhasanastito Shrimad Radha Sila Govinda Devo Prastali Bihi Sivyamano Smarami Shriman Rasa Rasarambi Vamsibata Tatastita Karsan Venus Manir Gopir Gopinatakstriyestuna Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai. Ishwara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Anadi Radhi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam Chintamani Prakara Sadma Sukalpa Vriksha Laksha Vrite Susurabhira Vipaliantam Lakshmi Sahasra Satasambhrama Sevyamanam Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Venum Kwananda Aravinda Dalaya Taksham Barhavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandarpa Kotika Maniya Visesha Sobham Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandrakala Sadvana Malya Vamsi Ratnam Gadam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam Shamam Chibanga Lalitani Taprakasam Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vrittimanti Pasyanti Panti Yanti Karyanti Chiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadrujvala Vigrahasya Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achyutam Anadi Mananta Rupa Madhyam Purana Purisham Navayovanam Cha Vedesa Durlabham Adurlabhamatma Bhakto Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastakoti Satavatsala Sampragam Yova Yoratapi Manasomani Pungamanam Sopyasti Yat Prapadasim Yavichintya Tatve Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Sora Chaitam Jagadanta Kotim Yaschakti Rasti Jagadanta Jaya Yadanta Andanta Rasta Paramanu Jayanta Rastam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yad Bhava Bhavitam Diyo Manajasta Taiva Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusa Suktarya Meva Nigama Pratitaistavanti Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavita Bhistabirya Eva Nijarupa Dayakalami Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena Santaksa Deva Hridesa Vilokayanti Yam Sham Sundaram Achintya Guna Swarupam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Mamadi Murti Sukalani Menatista Nana Avatara Makarod Bhuvanesa Kintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Pamanyo Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagananda Koti Kotisva Sesu Vasadadi Vibhuti Binam Tad Brahma Niskalamanam Tamasesa Bhutam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Mayahi Yasya Jagadanda Satani Sute Chaigunya Tad Visaya Veda Vitaya Manam Sattva Valambi Parasatvam Visuddha Sattvam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasatmataya Manasuya Praninam Pratifalam Smaratam Upetya Lilaya Tena Bhuvanani Jayaya Jasram Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Goloka Namni Nijadamni Tale Chatasya Devi Mahesu Haridama Sutesu Tesu Tete Prabhavani Vichasya Yena Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Srististati Pralaya Sadhava Sakti Reka Chayeva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga Ichana Rupam Abhyasya Chichesta Tesa Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Siram Yatal Dadi Vikara Visesa Yoga Sanjayate Naitata Pritakasti Hetu Yasam Bhutama Pitata Samapaitikar Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Departure Santana Abhyupetya Dipayate Vivita Heta Samanu Dharma Yastadri Gevihicha Vishnutaya Vibhati Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yakarna Narna Vijaliba Jisma Yoga Nidrama Nanta Jagadanda Saroma Kupa Adhara Saktim Avalambya Param Swamurtim Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yasyaika Nisvasita Kalamata Avalambya Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagadanda Nata Vishnur Mahansa Yasya Kalaviseso Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Basmanya Tasma Sakalesu Nijesu Teja Sviyam Kiyat Prakatayata Pitadvatatra Brahmaya Esa Jagadanda Vidanda Karta Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Pada Palava Yugam Vinidaya Kumbha Tvande Pranama Samayesa Ganadi Raja Vignan Vihanta Malamasya Jagatrayasya Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Agnir Mahika Ganamam Bumarudisasya Kalasta Tatma Manasiti Jagatrayani Yasmad Bhavanti Vibhavanti Visanti Yamcha Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yaschak Suresa Savita Sakalagrahanam Raja Samasta Suramurti Rasesa Teja Yasya Gaya Brahmati Sambrata Kala Chakra Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Dharmo Tapapa Nichaya Sutayastapam Se Brahma Dikita Patagava Yasyayuva Yadata Matra Vibhava Prakadapa Bhava Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yastrindra Gopa Matavendra Mahoswa Karma Bandanda Rupa Falabhajana Mata Noti Karmani Nirdahati Kintu Chabakti Bhajam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yam Kroda Kamasa Jabranadi Bitti Vatsalya Moho Guru Gora Vasevya Bhavai Sanchintya Tasya Sadrisim Tanamapurete Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Sriyakanta Kanta Parama Purisha Kalpataravo Jumabu Mischintamani Ganama Itoyam Amritam Kataganam Natyam Gamanam Apivam Sipriyasaki Chiranandam Jyoti Parama Pitada Swadyam Apichasa Yatra Shiradu Vihisravadi Shirabya Vyasta Sumehan Nimesar Daklu Bhavajatina Yatra Bisamaya Bhaje Svita Dvipam Tamaham Iha Golakam Itiham Vidanta Ste Santaksiti Virachara Katipaye Guru Astika prayers Kijay. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it. So the spiritual master delivers the material affected world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence. I offer my respectful obeisance to the lotus feet of such a spiritual master, who is an ocean of auspicious qualities, chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments. The spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion with his mind. Sometimes his hair stands on end, he feels quivering in his body, and tears flow from his eyes like waves. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always engaged in temple worship of Shri Radha and Krishna. He also engages his disciples in such worship. They dress their deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments, clean their temple, and perform other similar worship. But Lord, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food, analyzes that which is leaked, chewed, drunk, and sucked. When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasada, he is satisfied. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava and their qualities, names, and forms. The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert at assisting the gopis who at different times made different tastes and arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan. I offer my most humble obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he's the most confidential servant to the Lord. This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master as a bona fide representative of Sri Hare Krishna. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. Therefore, I shall always remember and praise the spiritual master at least 3 times a day. I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavatam Grantaraja Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're going to do again text 23. Daivadine Sukamesu Daivadina Swayam Pumam Kovishram Beta Yogena Yogeswaram Anuvrataha. Daiva, supernatural. Adinesu, being controlled. Kamesu, in sense enjoyment. Daiva Adina, controlled by supernatural force. Swayam, himself. Puman, living entity. Ka, whoever. Vishrambeta, can have faith in. Yogena, by devotional service. Yogeshwaram, the Supreme Lord. Anuvrata, serving. Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Every living entity is controlled by a supernatural force, and thus his sense enjoyment is also under the control of that supernatural force. No one, therefore, can put his faith in Lord Krishna's transcendental sense activities, but one who has become a devotee of the Lord by rendering devotional service. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, no one can understand the transcendental birth and activities of the Lord. The same fact is herein corroborated. No one but one who is enlightened by devotional service to the Lord can understand the difference between the Lord's activities and those of others who are controlled by the supernatural force. The sense enjoyment of all animals, men and demigods, within the purview of the material universe is controlled by the supernatural force called the Prakriti, or Daivi Maya. No one is independent in obtaining sense enjoyment, and everyone in this material world is after sense enjoyment. Persons who are themselves under the control of supernatural power cannot believe that Lord Krishna is not under any control beyond himself in the matter of sense enjoyment. They cannot understand that his senses are transcendental. In the Brahma Samhita, the Lord's senses are described as omnipotent. That is, with any sense, he can perform the activities of the other senses. One who has limited senses cannot believe that the Lord can eat by his transcendental power of hearing, and can perform the act of sex life simply by seeing. The controlled living entity cannot even dream of such sense activities in his conditional life. But simply by the activities of Bhakti Yoga, he can understand that the Lord and his activities are always transcendental. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 18:55, Bhaktya mam abhijananti yamanyaschasmi tatvataha. One cannot know even a fraction of the activities of the Lord if he is not a pure devotee of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Every living entity is controlled by a supernatural force, and thus his sense enjoyment is also under the control of that supernatural force. No one, therefore, can put his faith in Lord Krishna's transcendental sense activities but one, or except one, who has become a devotee of the Lord by rendering devotional service. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. There's some very interesting points. That's why it's the third time we're going over this verse. And it says here that sense enjoyment is under the control of that supernatural force. So you take that statement, and also in the purport it says, the sense enjoyment of all animals, men and demigods, within the purview of the material universe is controlled by the supernatural force called the Prakriti, or Daivi Maya. No one is independent in obtaining sense enjoyment, and everyone in this material world is after sense enjoyment. So, even to engage in sense enjoyment, one needs the help of Krishna. We are not independent in using our senses. This is explained also further in Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, verse number 12. Yaichai va sattvika bhava rajasas tamasas chaye mata eveti tanvide natva humte sute mai, where it says, know that all states of being, be they of goodness, passion, or ignorance, are manifested by my energy. I am in one sense everything, but I am independent. I am not under the modes of material nature, for they, on the contrary, are within me. So this is a very important verse. And the purport, it says, all material activities in the world are being conducted under the three modes of material nature. And those three modes of material nature are being controlled by Krishna. They're under his control completely. And these are supernatural forces that regulate or limit or in some way or other control the activities of all of us, including the animals and the birds and the insects and the aquatics and the reptiles and the mammals and the plants and also the human beings, all controlled by these three universal forces, supernatural forces, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Although these material modes of nature are emanations from the Supreme Lord, Krishna, he is not subject to them. For instance, under the state laws, one may be punished, but the king, the lawmaker, is not subject to that law. Similarly, all the modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, are emanations from the Supreme Lord, Krishna, but Krishna is not subject to material nature. Therefore, he is nirguna, which means that these gunas or modes, although issuing from him, do not affect him. That is one of the special characteristics of Bhagavan, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Mayavadis, of course, say that if Krishna appears in the material world, he's under the influence of the modes of material nature. That is a gross misconception. There are many misconceptions. In fact, the enemy of people are misconceptions that are put into their mind by false teachers. Now, this is very much explained also in the it's called misconceptions that adversely impact Vedic Dharma. This is something I've written. And it says, there are many misconceptions that have been accepted by followers of the Vedic Sanatana Dharma, mankind's eternal duty to serve Lord Krishna or God, that are obstacles to achieving complete self-realization and pure love or prema bhakti. The following is a list of the main obstacles. 1. Mayavad philosophy, or impersonalism, or Kevala Advaita, absolute oneness. That is a misconception. Why is it a misconception? Because the Mayavadis cancel everything out except for the Brahman effulgence. But yet, in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it says, Vadanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yajkaram advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti sabhyate. That the Supreme Absolute Truth is understood in 3 steps, or 3 phases: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So the Mayavadis, they cancel Paramatma and Bhagavan. They cancel the whole material world. They cancel the individuality of living entities. Basically, they cancel everything except for the Brahman effulgence. So their philosophy is false. That's why they're called Mayavadi, one who worships something that is false. So then, number 2, obstacle that has adversely impacted Vedic Dharma: man gods, false incarnations masquerading as God. There's so many of them in India and around the world also. They have the same problem in Christianity. They have the same problem in Islam. In all the religions, they have these crazy people that claim themselves to be God, and they're able to get followers who are what you would call low information people. Okay, and then number 3, demigod worship, with the misconception that all gods are equal. It's another major misconception that is impacting the purity of Vedic Dharma. Number 4, performance of Vedic ritualistic ceremonies for material benefits. So this is not correct. The purpose of yagyas is to please the Lord, not to get material benefits. And number 5, karma yoga, jnana yoga, mystic yoga, or Ashtanga yoga, adulterated by material desires, such as elevation to the heavenly planets in the material universe for enhanced sense gratification, or merging into the impersonal effulgence or Brahma Jyoti, and or thinking one has become God, mastering the 8 mystic powers, and thinking one is equal to God. So it's number 5, the false practice of karma yoga, jnana yoga, and mystic yoga. Number 6, the false concept that service to mankind is service to God. Manava Seva is Madhava Seva. It's a wrong concept. It's promoted by many people in India. Number 6, the false number 7, the idea that all religions are equal and that one can reach God by any path. This was Gandhi's philosophy, and it's a misconception. Number 7, the idea. Number 8, the Mammonist concept of life, purporting that the goal of life is work hard and enjoy sense gratification. So Mammonist, that's a Christian term. It means that people work very, very strenuously, and then they try and enjoy the fruits of their labor in the form of sense gratification. And then number 9, the belief that one can understand God by mental speculation, logic, reason, and scientific research. But Bhagavad Gita says, Bhakti Mam Abhijanati Yavanyaschasmi Tatpata Tatomam Tatputo Yadva Vishitetad Anantaram. It says clearly one can only understand Krishna by devotional service. It never says you can understand by speculation or science or this or that. Number 10, the false practice of Hindu caste system. So in Kali Yuga, the Brahmanas created the false caste system by changing one word. So in the Bhagavad Gita it says, Chaturvanya Maya Shishtam Guna Karma Vibhaga Saha. Krishna says, in the beginning of time I created the 4 divisions of society based on guna and karma, qualities and actions. So the Brahmins changed one word. They changed guna to janma. And so they made it not based on qualities, but based on birth. And that's false. That's not what the system is all about. You can go back in the Vedic history, and there's something called the Jabal Upanishad. And in that, there was a young boy named Jabal, and he accepted a guru. And, he was born in a low family. So when he went to a guru, the guru said, well, I can't accept you unless you tell me what your gotra is. He said, okay. So he goes home, and he was living in a single-parent family. He just knew his mother. He never knew his father. And he said to his mother, can you tell me what my gotra is, Mom, so my guru can accept me? And she sort of teared up and said, I can't really tell you. I was not living a good life at the time that I became pregnant, so I cannot actually say who is your father. Well, that was a real dilemma for Jabal. So he goes back and he tells Gautam Muni, he says, sir, I don't know what my gotra is because my mother says she doesn't know, she's not sure who my father is. So then Gautam Muni said, okay, I accept you as my disciple. So Jabal was shocked. He said, you accept me as your disciple? He said, yeah. He said, why? He said, you're a Brahmin. So how can I be a Brahmin? He said, because you told the truth. So you see, this was a Vedic tradition. This was, a Brahmin is known by qualities, not by birth. But see, the Brahmins in Kali Yuga, they changed that one word. You change one word of the Shastra, it creates a huge problem. And because of that, the Vedic Dharma is diminishing because of that falsity. That's how dangerous speculation and changing things can be. You change one word, it can have a huge impact on society. And then next one, the number 11, the false concept of Daridya Narayana and Harijan, rubber stamping of people. So a rubber stamp, you put a stamp on someone's forehead. This is a Harijan, right? But that guy can have very bad habits. So just rubber stamping someone, Harijan, doesn't mean that they're actually a servant of the Lord. Because if they still have bad habits, that belies their so-called stamp on their forehead. So this rubber stamping of people, such as Daridya Narayana, the poor Narayana, or Harijan, the children of God, doesn't mean anything. Training people to become genuine devotees, that means something. Stamping them doesn't mean a thing. And this is what has been going on. Gandhi did it, and others. And then, point number 12, acceptance of Western pedagogy for the teaching method in India and throughout the world. So pedagogy is the method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or theoretical concept. Or it's also the art and science or profession of teaching, study of different teaching methods. So the method they use here in America and in India and all over the world is atheistic humanism. Now, how that happened? Well, it's a product of the Enlightenment period. If you look that up, the period of Enlightenment was like the late 16th and 17th century. And during that time, there was a sort of revolt against what was called the scholasticism. This was the priests who based everything on the Bible, on the Shastra. And all education was based on, some spiritual orientation and, strict laws of spirituality. So there was a revolt against that. Now, we can understand why also, but I'll discuss that in a minute. So in the so-called Enlightenment, you see they always put these good-sounding names, but actually it wasn't Enlightenment. It was a license to speculate. That's what it became, a license to be able to speculate about anything. And because of that, it caused havoc again. Now, why did they want to reject scholasticism, which was, basing everything on Christian, let's say, dogma? Well, because the Christians made mistakes also. That's the problem. If they didn't make those mistakes, there wouldn't have been a revolt against them and their teaching method. So I'm going to get to this Christian problem in a second. So this acceptance of Western pedagogy based on atheistic humanism has been a disaster for educating young kids. And then next, the belief that industrialization, technology, economic development, modern armaments like atomic bombs, rockets, etc., will evolve the country. All this leads to the belief that sense gratification is a goal of life, and for sustained sense gratification, one needs economic development. So this is another false premise. Economic development through industrialization is not really going to improve society. If anything, it's a deterioration of society. And if we actually look at the history of the world since the industrialization, which happened mostly in the late 17th, 18th century. And by the 19th century, it was just going, full force. And by the 1930s, in the early 20th century, people were convinced that they could control nature completely with science and industrialization. And one example of that was the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller family was very famous. They were very, very rich. And one member of the family had some kind of a mental problem. So they talked to some surgeons who were studying the brain, right? And the surgeon said, well, there's a certain part of the brain, if we adjust it, that problem will go away. So the Rockefeller's family decided to let their, I think it was a girl member, be operated on her brain. And they did this operation because they said, we've mapped out the brain, we know that part of the brain that, if it's adjusted, her problem will go away, right? So they operated on her. See, this is how much faith people had in industrialization and modern science and so forth. Like when you get to the 1930s, where you see, the huge development in a very short time of Germany, and Germans had the best science in the world at that time, and in America was trying to catch up to Germany, and other parts of Europe were trying to catch up to them because they had the top scientists in the world. So after the operation, the girl became a vegetable. There's complete opposite. They should have left her alone. She was not completely functional, but she was somewhat functional. After the operation, she became completely dysfunctional because they were tinkering around with their speculation that, this part of the brain will control this problem, and that part of the brain will control this other problem. So it just made it much worse, and that girl became a vegetable. So this was at the height of people's belief in science. Nowadays, people still believe in science and industrialization, but they have some problems. One problem of scientific advancement and industrialization is contamination of the climate and of the earth. So they have this environmental problem now. Why? Because most of the industrialization is advancing through inorganic chemistry. Now, inorganic chemistry is dangerous because most of the inorganic molecules are poisonous. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So therefore, in the 1930s, there was a Jewish doctor. His name was Wahlberg. And the Nazis didn't kill him, although they were killing a lot of Jews. Why? Because he was somewhat like he was a very, very famous researcher. And he got a Nobel Prize for his research in something, but he also was an expert in cancer. And he said, the real cause of cancer is exposure to toxic chemicals and toxic molecules. And he gave an exhaustive list of those toxic things. And there's a lot of things in a house that are toxic. They can be perfumes, they can be cleaning materials, cleaning products, they can be rugs, they can be paint. They all contain potentially toxic inorganic chemicals. And by associating with those chemicals, and some of those things like preservatives, they're in food, right? Like sodium benzoate, sodium this and that. So all those things are toxic. Of course, they put those in small quantities, but over a long period of time, there's a cumulative effect, and that causes cancer. Right? Okay, so here, but cancer research is not so much concerned with those toxic materials. They're trying to heal cancer through genetic modification, which is impossible. So all the money they collect for cancer research is usually going into genetic manipulation to cure cancer, which is impossible. So we see how their demand for money to cure cancer never stops. Every year they're asking more and more money. And their research area is one that is not going to succeed. Okay, so next, number 14, the belief that speculation will help one understand reality, the ascending process of knowledge, or aroha. There's avaroha, the descending process of knowledge, and aroha, the ascending process of knowledge. So that was another misstep or another falsity that developed in the Enlightenment period, and it has just increased over time. And then number 15, that there are no absolutes, only relative things. And when you believe that there are no absolutes, of course, Krishna is the supreme absolute truth. Satyam Param Dhimahi, in the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, clearly says that. But all the so-called scientists, philosophers, they say everything is relative. There are no absolutes. Why? Because if they admit an absolute, they must surrender to it. Right? So they cannot admit there's an absolute. Otherwise, they would be obliged to surrender. So they have insulated the whole learning process in such a way that one ends up, that has no choice but to become an atheist. Right? Even if they follow religion, they still follow it in an atheistic way or a materialistic way, as a crutch rather than as the truth. When you talk about a crutch, it's an emotional crutch. It makes them feel better, but it doesn't really solve their problems because they're still committing sins. Okay, so these are misconceptions that have adversely impacted Vedic Dharma, but there are also misconceptions that have, in a very serious way, affected Christianity. So the biggest mistake the Christians made was trying to understand the transcendental nature of Jesus Christ by relying on Greek philosophy. And this is and their choice of Greek philosophers was Aristotle, who was basically the father of modern nonsense science, and who also was basically deviated from Plato and Socrates, who both were Mayavadis, but at least they believed in God, like Brahman, and they believed in reincarnation. But Aristotle didn't accept that. Now, what did Aristotle do that deviated from Socrates and Plato? He said that there are two types of souls. There's an immortal soul, and there's a temporary soul. This was a huge mistake, and based on that, he said there's two types of souls, mortal and immortal. So then, when you get into the Christian period, so Aristotle, of course, is before the Christian period, at least 300 to 500 years before the Christianity took over in Europe. So when you get into the 3rd century, 4th century after Christ, the Christian period begins in full strength. One of the first philosophers of the Christians was Augustine. And he said, since there are mortal and immortal souls, the mortal souls are meant for man's use, whether they're dead or alive. So in other words, therefore, one can change the commandment, or one can understand the commandment in respect to this new understanding that there are some mortal souls. And therefore, when it says, thou shalt not kill, it doesn't mean anything. It means you shouldn't kill any human being, but you can kill the animals and eat them because they don't have an immortal soul. They don't have an immortal soul. So you see how this slippery slope is there. And then after Augustine, who said this, this became, when it says thou shalt not kill, Augustine said that only refers to human beings. It doesn't refer to the animals. That's a long time ago. That's not something recent. You're going back in the early years of Christianity, 3rd, 4th, 5th century after Christ. And then you have another Christian, philosopher called Origen, and he says, but souls are created. They're not immortal. They're created. And he said, and so when he said that, a little bit later on in the 10th century comes Aquinas, who was the biggest philosopher of the Christians, especially the Catholics. And he said that the creation of the human soul is at the moment of conception. And this became the official philosophy of the Catholic Church. Up until today, they believe the same thing, that the soul of a human being begins at conception in the womb of the mother. And therefore, they do not accept that individual souls like you and me have immortality before birth in this body, during birth in the body, and after birth in the body. And then this belief that each individual human being is created at a point in time, lives his or her life, and thereafter is saved or damned eternally, excludes the possibility of reincarnation. So that's because of Aquinas. He codified, and the church accepted it as the truth, that souls are created. They're not actually fully immortal. Immortal means, except for all of us, Jesus is the only one who was existing before birth, existing in his appearance in the material world, and continues to exist after he went back to Godhead. So he has full immortality. But you and me, we don't have full immortality according to the Catholic Church. And also, there's no question of reincarnation, and there's no question of karma. So the Church rejected karma, the law of karma, and they rejected reincarnation based on this slippery slope, starting with Aristotle, who was not even a Christian, right? But he was a materialist philosopher. Then Augustine, then Origen, then also Aquinas, and then you end up with the modern Catholic philosophy, which is very flawed. And we see that in the discussion between Cardinal Danilo and Prabhupada, which we listened to a little bit a couple days ago. But Cardinal Danilo was insisting, look, let's not talk about animals. We know that they're meant for human beings. We can eat them. There's no problem there. You know, it's not such an important subject. They don't have immortal souls. So what's the problem? You know, let's talk about other things. And Prabhupada refused to change the subject. You know, and Danilo remained very adamant about this because it's Catholic dogma, right? And that the soul is not really immortal. Now, what happens when that? What are the results of that type of philosophy? Well, by denying reincarnation, Augustine and Aquinas broke their relationship to Platonic tradition. That means what Plato and Socrates were saying. They believed that there is an immortal soul. They believed in reincarnation. And they also believed in karma. Right? Now, if we look at all the Greek philosophers, I consider the greatest Greek philosopher is Pythagoras. He was actually a devotee. He was a brahmachari. He had a brahmachari ashram. He was a vegetarian. He refused to eat meat. And you don't hear too much about him. You know the Pythagorean theorem, right? And geometry. You know, he was the founder of that, or at least he borrowed most of that from India. But he was actually a devotee, right? He believed in reincarnation. He believed in karma, all those things. But they don't talk about him too much other than his geometry. So, and even in this book, Dialectic Spiritualism, they don't talk about Pythagoras. They just talk about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. So anyway, by denying reincarnation, Augustine and Aquinas, they broke with the tradition, Platonic tradition of Socrates and Plato. And he made it difficult for subsequent, let's say, philosophers of Christianity to understand evil in society or in the world. In other words, if you say there's no such thing as transmigration of souls, then a question comes up, is there actually a divine justice? Is God actually a good guy? You know, why? Because how can we account for fortune and misfortune then? Some people are born, you know, they have nice bodies, they're healthy, they have material development, they have nice kids, they have a nice family. Somebody else can be born blind or crippled. And how do you explain that? You know, if you say there's no such thing as reincarnation and there's no such thing as karma, that means that, you know, God chooses that some people should be miserable and some people should be happy. So therefore it says, why is one man pious, knowledgeable, and beautiful, or opulent, and another man impious, ignorant, deformed, or poor? Why, on the basis of one lifetime, is one man eternally saved and another eternally damned? Why is God so arbitrary, so unmerciful? Having rejected the possibilities of transmigration of the soul and karma, Western philosophers have been troubled because evil exists. They argue either God's power is limited, or he is not a good person, or he does not exist at all. So this has plagued Christianity, and many people become agnostic or atheist, and they argue against the Christian church and Christian philosophy because it doesn't make sense. Okay, so it's not only in Hinduism, it's in Christianity also, all these misconceptions. And then you can go into Islam also. There are similar problems like that because the Muslim philosophers also relied on Greek philosophy to understand their relationship with Allah. And the most famous one is called Ibn Ghazali. And Ghazali was a Mayavadi in the 10th century. So we'll talk about that at another time. So we see that in all the major religions of the world, including Buddhism and Christianity, and Islam, and Judaism, and so forth, there are major misconceptions, and this causes havoc in society. So everyone in the material world is being controlled by these supernatural forces called the three modes of material nature. On the other hand, it says, Tribir Gunamayir Bhaver, Ebi Sarvam Idam Chagat, Mohitam Nabijanati, Mam Ebyam Param Avyayam. The 7th chapter, verse 13. Deluded by the three modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, the whole world does not know me, Krishna says, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. Now, Mayavadis say that Krishna, if he appears, he's under the modes of material nature. So therefore, you can't really understand Krishna through Mayavad philosophy. And you can't really understand Krishna with all those misconceptions in Vedic Dharma, in Christianity, in Islam, and Judaism. So the whole world, and Hinduism, the whole world is enchanted. The purport it says, the whole world is enchanted by the three modes of material nature. Those who are bewildered by these three modes cannot understand that transcendental to this material nature is the Supreme Lord, Krishna. Every living entity under the influence of material nature has a particular type of body and a particular type of psychological and biological activities accordingly. There are four classes of men functioning in the three material modes of nature. Those who are purely in the mode of goodness are called brahmanas. Those who are purely in the mode of passion are called kshatriyas. Those who are in the mode of both passion and ignorance are called vaishyas. And those who are completely in ignorance are called sudras. And those who are less than that are animals or animal life. However, these designations are not permanent. That's a very important point. If they were permanent, then we would all be in big trouble. Right? But they're not permanent. So therefore, one can be born lowest class, less than Sudra, much less than Sudra. Still, if they surrender to Krishna, they can become purified. Because these things, you have Bhagavan, you have Jiva, you have Prakriti, you have Kala, and you have Karma. The first four are eternal. You can't change them. The fifth, Karma, is changeable. Thank God. If it wasn't changeable, there'd be no hope for us. You see? So we have to understand that. The first four are eternal. You cannot change them. You cannot alter them. But the fifth, karma, is something that can be altered. Right? And therefore it says, however, these designations are not permanent. Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra. And even the three modes of material nature, they're always fluctuating. Right? Even in one day, they can fluctuate in the influences on a person. But most of the time, most people are under the influence of passion and ignorance. Maybe they have a little bit of goodness, but it's not predominant, right? So in the modes of passion and ignorance, it is impossible to understand anything about Krishna. You might be able to understand very, very tiny little bit in passion. Ignorance is no possibility at all. But in general, whenever one is passionate, there's also greed. So greedy people, they don't understand anything. Okay, so then it says, I may be either a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or whatever. In any case, this life is temporary. But although life is temporary and we do not know what we are going to be in the next life, by the spell of this illusory energy, we consider ourselves in terms of this bodily conception of life And we thus think that we are American, Indian, Russian, or Brahmana, Hindu, Muslim, etc. And if we become entangled with the modes of material nature, then we forget the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is behind all these modes. So Lord Krishna says that the living entities, deluded by these three modes of nature, do not understand that behind the material background is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There are many different kinds of living entities, human beings, demigods, animals, etc. And each and every one of them is under the influence of material nature, and all of them have forgotten the transcendent personality of Godhead. Those who are in the modes of passion and ignorance, and even those who are in the mode of goodness, cannot go beyond the impersonal Brahman conception of the Absolute Truth. They are bewildered before the Supreme Lord in his personal feature, which possesses all beauty, opulence, knowledge, strength, fame, and renunciation. When even those who are in goodness cannot understand, what hope is there for those in passion and ignorance? Krishna consciousness is transcendental to all these three modes of material nature, and those who are fully established in Krishna consciousness are actually liberated. Okay, so therefore, 14th chapter, 26th verse is extremely important because it says, Mam chayo vipacharina bhakti yogena sevate sagunam samatityaitam brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in devotional service and does not fall down under any circumstances. In other words, they're fully engaged in Krishna's service all the time. They can transcend the influence of the modes of material nature and come to the level of Brahman, the spiritual level. Okay, so that's 14th chapter, 26th verse. That means that this is real education. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So the level of Brahman means you no longer have any problems because you're not identifying with the body. You're identifying with Krishna. And you depend completely on Krishna. You're not depending on your 401k or this strategy or that strategy to become rich. You're just depending on Krishna. And you're living a basic, simple life, simple living, high thinking. In other words, a minimalist life. This is important. Why? Because the less complicated our life, the more easy it is to think of Krishna all the time. If we have a very complicated life due to wanting to make a lot of money and having a lot of prestigious things, cars and suits and jewelry and all these things, it just causes problems. And the more rich a person is, the more they attract thieves. Just like Kim Kardashian, she goes to Paris to be involved in some kind of fashion show or something. She stays in one of the most secure hotels that's promising absolute security, right? And she gets robbed. These thieves get into her room, threaten her, and steal her ring, which costs $4 million, and other jewelry. They get away with, I think, $15 million of her jewelry. And they get away. They never caught those thieves. And this was in the most secure hotel in Paris. So it had to be an inside job. There's no way they could have pulled it off. But they've never caught them. So all this opulence, all it does is attract low-class people and thieves. So it's better not to have all these expensive trappings or expensive clothing, expensive jewelry, expensive this, expensive that, because it's only going to attract low-class people. Excuse me. Okay, so getting back to this purport, we see that no one is independent in obtaining sense enjoyment, and everyone in this material world is after sense enjoyment. Persons who are themselves under the control of supernatural power cannot believe that Lord Krishna is not under any control beyond himself in the matter mental. Okay, so that's a very fundamental point, and we should, if you want to be a preacher, you have to understand this point, because people have become convinced that if there is a God, he's something like us, right? He has the same, weaknesses that we do. He might be a little bit better than us, but we can, if we do some yoga or something, we'll be like him or better than him. So this is the sad state of misunderstanding today. So, therefore, if everything is going to depend on our desires, if we become convinced by all these misconceptions that the goal of life is sense gratification, then all of our desires are corrupted by the desire for sense gratification, and everything we do will be in a state of illusion and ultimately defeat. So, how to overcome this? Well, it's a slow process, because we haven't only had one life of sense gratification. To get to the human form, we went through all 8,400,000 species to get to the human form that's civilized. Civilized means regulated according to Krishna's Sanatana Dharma. So, the more we regulate our activities based on Krishna consciousness, the more we become free of the influence of the modes of material nature. So, therefore, this waking up early, going to sleep early, waking up early, attending morning program, hearing classes, and going out on Sankirtan, taking prasadam, all of this is part of the purification process. And you're not purifying just one lifetime. You're purifying all those lifetimes that we've already had, right? And all the misconceptions that we picked up on the way to where we are now. So it's not an easy thing. It's very difficult to purify everything. Okay, so Prabhupada wanted this movement to purify people of all these misconceptions. So we see it's an upward battle because there's the odds are against us, because there's so many people in this age now. Like, for example, I'll give one example. Everyone's talking about climate change, right? And they're saying it's due to carbon emissions, this thing, that thing. Right? It's because cows are passing bad air. Right? That's because of that. There's changing climate. It's not true, but anyway, they're making all these points up, and people, they teach it in school, and young kids, they believe it, right? Because the teacher said so. It's in the textbook, right? But the actual cause of climate, let's say inclement weather, is the fact that demons are being born. And every time a demon is born, there's a disruption of the natural weather patterns. Right? There are hurricanes, there are floods, there are earthquakes, and so forth. So in previous times, there were only a few demons, right? Ravana and Kamsa, Kumbhakarna, thing like that. Nowadays, every day, demons are being born. That's why there's so much climate fluctuation. See? Now, if you explain this to someone, they say, "I don't believe that. That's nonsense." It's because of the cows farting. That's why there's climate change. So you see, it says it's not going to be easy to convince people about the truth, right? Especially because they think everything is relative. There are no absolutes. This is what's taught in schools. This is what's given by the philosophers today. So, but we have to be convinced. If you're convinced, then you can convince another person. If you're not convinced, you're just mouthing words, you won't be able to convince anyone. Right? Now, do we actually believe this? Well, there has to be Shastric evidence of it, right? That the climate change is actually due to too many demons being born. Well, that's your homework. Look it up in Prabhupada's books where it says that. We've read that already in the second canto and probably in this canto too. But do this homework. Look it up. See if you're convinced that this is true or not. Okay, we'll stop right there. Are there any questions?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. So I think your explanation of how the faults in Christianity gave birth to scientific explorations, but which also led to more atheistic conceptions.
Well, no, I was talking about misconceptions in Christianity.
Yeah, misconceptions.
That have become dogma in the church, and it's caused a lot of problems for them.
Correct. It fundamentally broke down.
And at the same time, I talked about the misconceptions in the Sanatana Dharma, or so-called Hinduism, that it just caused havoc. Right? And the same thing can be said about Islam. I can research it, and because they're choosing to understand God through Greek philosophy of Aristotle. That's a huge mistake. If they chose to understand Jesus or Muhammad or Allah through Vedic philosophy, a real Vedic philosophy, not the bogus Hinduism, they would have got it right. But they chose Greek philosophy. Go ahead.
I think the source of everything, as you said, is, for example, why we insist on the parampara, unalloyed parampara, is so important, because otherwise the conceptions, mental speculation will easily come in, because we're always under the influence of the modes of the nature.
Yeah, in other words, there's such a thing called hermeneutics. Hermeneutics purportedly is the correct way to speculate. But that's not, that's very, very tangential. That's not exactly absolute. The best thing is just to rely on the statements of pure devotees like Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and the Acharyas, and ultimately Krishna's words. Because as soon as we even say, well, this is the correct way to speculate, it's still speculation. So, just like yesterday I had a talk with Chaitanya Charan, and he said, well, there is induction, and there's deduction, and there's also abduction. I said, well, what's the abduction? He said, well, you just start with what you know, and then you speculate based on what you know. Yeah, so induction is you do a lot of research, you see a pattern, you come up with a theory and see, how much that theory is predictable, gives you predictable results, right? And then deduction is you begin with a hunch and you assume it's true, and then you deduct. And every time you come up with a deduction, if it is validated by actual experience in life, then your process of deduction is correct. But that's not Vedic deduction. Vedic deduction is you begin with the a priori truths of the Vedas, and then you deduct, right? So just like every man is mortal, John is a man, therefore he's mortal, right? So the a priori truth is every person is mortal. And then you deduct, John is a man, therefore he's mortal. So the Vedic process of deduction is beginning with the truths, the self-evident truths of the Vedas, and you deduct from that. Just like it's self-evident truth that the moon is a heavenly planet. But the United States, who claims they went to the moon, they say there's nothing there, it's all dust. And what do they have to show for it? 6 rocks in the Smithsonian Institute after spending $30 billion trying to go to the moon. And those rocks look very similar to the rocks in New Mexico. So, that's the only proof they have. They say, oh yeah, we brought these rocks back from the moon, right? So you see, this is nonsense. If you spent $30 billion and you have 6 rocks as proof that you went to the moon, that's complete nonsense. Even though it's in the Smithsonian Institute, the highest, most, let's say, most touted institute in the world. right? But it doesn't mean anything. Okay, so go ahead.
I think just to make sure that I understood. So first they said there is souls are bifurcated.
First, Aristotle said
like
there's
immortal
two types
versus
of souls.
souls, and
Immortal
then
and mortal.
and then Aquinas then used that philosophy to say that immortals can then kill the mortal souls.
Yeah, he said if there are mortal souls, that means they're subordinate to us. Therefore, God has given them for us to use or exploit. He didn't say exploit, but to use. So therefore, you can eat animals because their soul is not immortal.
But then later,
therefore, there's no sin involved, and God wants us to use them. That's the way he interpreted that.
But at some point, they moved even the humans from the immortal to the mortal.
Well, no. Then Origen says that the soul is born at some point.
Mm.
It's a slippery slope. It's going from one to the other, and then Aquinas accepted that the soul is born and he said the soul is born at conception. That's why the Catholics are against abortion, because they think the soul is born not at birth but at conception, right?
Mm.
So, but by saying that, they eliminate the possibility of reincarnation and karma.
So then the question is, they do also have this judgment day, because obviously at the time
Yes.
of birth. So what is judgment if the soul is temporary, or it is born at the conception? But
for them, the immortality of the soul is after birth in the world. So before birth, there's no soul. It only comes into existence. This is Christian philosophy. It's not our philosophy,
correct,
right?
correct.
According to Christian philosophy, the soul is only born at conception. And then after that, it can either be liberated by believing in Jesus, or by not believing in Jesus, you go to hell.
So it's a one-way track. It's either this.
Yeah, it all points that God is not really a good person, basically, or that he's not really in control of everything. Okay. Or it doesn't really exist. It's one of those three conclusions. Either he's a bad guy, or he's not in control, or he doesn't exist. Because it's unfair. The whole system is unfair. Why should someone be born perfectly healthy and another person is born blind? What did they do to be born blind? Well, they don't believe in karma. They don't believe in reincarnation. So therefore, God made them like that. So why would God make someone like that? So it leads to that. Therefore, he can't be a really nice person then. He's being prejudiced, making someone blind, and another person has eyes. See, so it's caused a lot of problems for Christianity. This idea, that was formalized in the 6th and the 10th century by Aquinas, that the soul is born at conception. In other words, it didn't exist before that. And therefore, there's no question of reincarnation. And then when you die, that's it. There's only one lifetime. Either you are liberated or you're not liberated. So it's very, very, not very nice situation. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll stop right there. Thank you very much. All glories to Prabhupada Ki Jai. You see, the real devil is misinformation and misconceptions. That's the real devil. That's the real enemy of people. And the whole educational system is to mislead people nowadays. No. Okay. Go ahead.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma.
Bando Moi Savadana Mate. Jahara Prasade Bai E Baba Toriya Jai.
Janara Prasade Vai E Baba Toriya Jai.
Krishna Prapti Hoy Jaha Hoy Te.
Krishna Prati Hoya Hoy.
Guru Mokha Padma Vakya Chitite Koriya Kya.
Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitte Koriya Aikya.
Arana Kori Ho Mane Asha.
Arana Koriya Mane
Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Utama Gati.
Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Utama Gati.
Jai Prasade Pure Sarva Asha.
Ye Prasade Pure
चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से. चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से. दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो. प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते. वेदे गाय जहाँ रचरितो. श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु आदम जैनार बंधु. लोकेनाथ लोकेर जीवाना. हा हा प्रभु करो दया देहो मोरे पद छाया. हे बेजास गशिक त्रिभुवाना. श्रीला प्रभुपाद पतित पावना. जय प्रभुपद जय प्रभुपद जय प्रभुपद जय प्रभुपद. नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine.
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine.
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva. Nitya Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitya Gaura Hari Bol. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Shri Radha Krishna Govardhan Sam Kundaradha Vrindavan Vrindavan Tulasi Devi ki jai, Rati Devi ki jai, Rangamayi ki jai, Jamunamayi ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta ki jai, Thai Gorpe, all glories to Samaveda, all glories to Samaveda, all glories to Shri Guru, Shri Guru, all glories to Srila Prabhupada,
The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. One can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates, by him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean mercy, the friend of the poor, and the Lord and master devotees. O Master, be merciful unto me. Give me the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the three worlds. We take shelter of your lotus feet, Srila Prabhupada.